Weird Tales Told by a Dubliner by Turlough, Conmee. Story number 9. She died wondering. One of the things we used to do with the ma as kids was to sit at the fireside in the afternoon and drink tea. Tea in Ireland accompanies every time of the day. You have tea to wake up in the morning, tea to relax at night before going to bed, tea if you can't sleep during the night, tea to warm you up in the winter, tea to refresh you in the summer, tea to revive you when you're tired, tea to calm you when you're worked up. The ma used to repeat like a mantra, tea is good for whatever ails you. She had reason to invoke the medicinal properties of tea. She suffered from headaches, which later turned out to be migraines. Looking back, I can't help wondering now if they were fey migraines. She found relief for them in drinking endless cups of tea. The leaf tea we drink in Ireland, or did drink before tea bags came in, was as fine as dust. Under the effect of the boiling water, these small dark grains expanded. Preparing tea was pretty much a feminine prerogative, but men were certainly admitted to these mysteries on a footing of equality. We drank tea as a family too, around the table or by the fire. It was a time for conversation. Today when I think of tea, I think of the glow of the fire and the voices that told stories and discussed. What was it about the tea drinking? We Irish took it very seriously. It was the social ritual. If someone came to your house, it was rude not to offer them tea, and it would be rude of them to refuse. During the tea drinking, there was conversation, of course, but there was also companionable, meditative silence. The part about meditative silence expands now in my mind as I think to take in Japan. If only from books and films, we know about what the Japanese have made of tea and tea drinking. They have their tea ceremony. They've made it into a spiritual experience. Tea with them has to do with death. Reduce life to sitting around looking at one another drinking tea, and you focus on time. Human time is finite. Our time runs out. Tea time focuses us somehow back on the clock which is ticking away in the background. In Japan, the business of tea drinking has been taken a step further. There are even tea masters who make a profession of showing people the fine points of the tea ceremony. But the man knew all about the mysteries of tea, I'll be bound. So she was a tea mistress of sorts, a powerful figure in her own way, but understated. One thing she had though was a terrible temper. She could fly into a rage all of a sudden. I remember as a little boy dreaming about her once as being split into two. For the moment, my own kindly mother had forsaken me and been replaced by this shouting, evil version of her, her face contorted into an ugly mask of fury. I only wished for the good version to come back. In Ireland, we always drank tea, not coffee, around the fireside. Along with the English, we were different from the rest of Europe and from the Americas. Few still do drink coffee in Ireland, much less understand coffee. Adults, old people, children, even the youngest drink tea. With us, even the dog used to drink tea in his dish once in a while. Up in Derry, where we used to visit the ma's relatives, an aunt had a porcelain tea set that someone had brought her from Rome. The cups were adorned with a painted portrait of Pope Pius XII. The porcelain was so thin and fragile that the tea had to be drunk with a spoon in the cup for fear that it would break from the heat. Heaven forbid. This set was only for Sundays and feast days. I was always afraid of dropping the cup, given that, as I drank every drop of tea, I saw the severe and ascetic face, with his glasses and his skull cap, of Pius XII looking up at me. You saw him on the outside of the cup, and then when you got to the bottom of your tea, you saw him again. He looked as if he tolerated no nonsense. In them days, tea meant tea leaves, made in an aluminium or earthenware or other metal pot with hot water. Today, of course, people are used to tea bags. There were no tea bags then. What is more, there were no metal baskets or so-called tea eggs holding the leaves in the pot. As a result, you got a few leaves in your teacup, which you just had to let settle in the bottom after you added a little milk to your tea. The invariable Irish custom was to have tea with a little milk in it. It was related how, at the outset of the Second World War, De Valera had negotiated a bulk supply of tea from Assam in India. This, since it was all there was for several years of wartime, turned out to be the permanent Irish taste, which was slightly different from what they liked in England. Assam tea was slightly more bitter and flavourful, and we liked it that way, and have done so ever since. It's the taste we know. When you were finished the cup of tea, a configuration of leaves was left at the bottom, black against the white porcelain. Today this looks to me like nothing so much as Chinese or Japanese brush writing, an unintelligible script. Yet the Ma assured us that it made a picture that could be interpreted, and this told the future of the particular tea drinker. It was a matter of projection, really. The fortune teller claimed to see pictures that were in the cup, but really they projected an interpretation into the rather arbitrary visual signs in the cup. It was rather like what Leonardo da Vinci said in his time about how an old wall with stains and marks on it quite at random suggests all kinds of patterns to the creative artist, just like he says people project a particular tune into the sound of bells they hear in the distance. Since them childhood days of mine, things have changed, of course. Today there are tea bags, which have put paid to tea leaf divination, but also to the whole mystique of tea that inheres in the leaves. By the way, there are actually very good tea bags in Ireland, made by a factory in Cork. Yet the true tea connoisseur sticks to tea leaves. The leaves go in the pot and hot water is poured on them. When you get your cup of tea, leaves are still floating in the cup on the surface of the liquid. You see them when you put milk in your tea, which is part of the ceremony. These leaves remain at the bottom of the cup when finished. When you pour the last cups from a pot, you tend to get a lot of leaves. As regards reading the tea leaves, it's best after the first few cups, when the teacup is empty and there's a sort of sparse message left to decipher. This was writing by the hand of chance, announcing a good or bad future. It was fate itself, writing with an anonymous hand about events to come. But you had to be able to read. Mostly the pictures that suggested themselves were nonsense. But if you were fey, you'd be looking in there with a question, and you might be granted some fearful answer. So, as a kind of ritual, us chisellers had to pass our empty cups to the Ma to be read, as she put it. It was always the same kind of thing she foretold in response. You're going to get a letter or a parcel, or you're going to meet a tall dark man, or see a little dog. A deliberate anticlimax. After she said this, she would often laugh, as if to remind us not to take it seriously. It was just a kind of game, really, a social amusement around the fireside. A parlour game of guessing. Now I'm thinking it was a counterphobic ritual. A deliberate attempt to make something look harmless that was not, and to take the frightening aspects out of it. To this day, I myself can see only arbitrary resemblances in tea leaves. I tend to see these things as geographical objects, an archipelago of islands, or a map of Australia, or the like. Yet everything else about the ritual suggested to us kids that there was a secret and a mystery to it. This was due to the personality of the Ma herself and her differentness. There was a whole atmosphere of superstitions that surrounded the Ma. She seemed to have brought them from Derry or even rural Donegal, where the Craigs came from, of course. The Dublin people weren't that way. But these superstitions she took deadly seriously in her own quiet way. She'd never wear the colour green, maintaining that it was unlucky. She'd never allow anyone to cross knives and forks on the table, as she said it meant strife in the house. Which was ironic, as there always seemed to be strife in our house. This was just like a taboo from the South Sea Islands, and indeed a rather imperious one. I felt it so, for I dreaded domestic strife. Even today, I find myself rearranging crossed cutlery on a table if I see it. It often seems to end up that way on plates following a meal. The Ma was delighted, I remember, when someone gave her an old horseshoe, and my father nailed it up over the lintel of the kitchen door for her. This really was for good luck, she believed. I didn't understand, for my upbringing otherwise didn't allow me to have any but the vaguest notion of what luck was. She also told us kids never to kill a spider in the house, as they brought luck. How different all this was from me father's family and all the other people we knew in Dublin. It was a whole dimension that was missing from life, and reading the tea leaves was somehow part of it. As I've said, the Ma didn't seem to take it seriously. But she didn't take herself seriously as a woman, since in the Craigs she was the youngest in a family of boys. Maybe she only expected men to be taken seriously, not herself. Growing up, I found women's lives like the Ma's to be somehow less inhabited than men's. In our families, women told few stories and seemed to have few to tell. It was the men who were the repositories of tale and tradition. Still, what was undeniably an alien and commanding presence at home was the Northern Ireland dialect which the Ma brought from her upbringing in Derry. The Northern Ireland dialect was a part of her. I got to understand it bit by bit, though I was always having to ask what this or that word meant. If you ask me now what me mother tongue is, and mean the language or variety of language I learned from the lips of me mother, I would have to say Ulster Scots, the kind of Scots they spoke and speak in Northern Ireland. There's a magic for that very reason, no doubt for me, in Scots verse, from Rabbi Burns to Hugh MacDiarmid. Why is this so? Well, because it is me mother tongue. I heard it from wee Annie Craig, as they had called her in Derry, me mother. Although her father's family were Irish speakers out in Donegal, me mother knew no Irish at all. Yet her language was not English either, but Ulster Scots. It was not just a northern accent, as people call it in the south. It was a real dialect with its own vocabulary. It was an intermediary between English and Irish, I found, or even an intermediary between English and other languages. When I was excited or worried, she'd tell me, "Don't fash yourself." To get me to stay where I was, she'd say, "Rest there." To let me know that she wouldn't stand for something, she'd say, "Och, I'll not thole that." When I was rebellious to her will, she'd say, "You're thran." To express the idea that there was no choice, she would say, "It's not aye will ye, but ye maun do it." I heard all these remarkable pieces of language when I was a little boy by the fireside drinking tea. There were many words I didn't know, especially when the ma was angry. You'd hear the full blast of dialect from her. One day as we drank tea at the fireside, she got annoyed at the dog who was in the way. She shouted at him, "Get out, you hers get!" The dog seemed to understand and fled. "What's a hers get?" I asked the ma. She laughed and looked embarrassed. "Oh, never mind," she said, and disappeared out into the kitchen. That dialect reminded me later of the strange fey atmosphere of the Scottish border ballads, in which, as a character marked by fate, you have to dree or weird. This was a kind of language that seemed to admit of no compromises, and stated things starkly, but enigmatically. Aye, we never forgot that the ma came from a different world from Dublin, and she belonged to a different world. There she sat at the fireside, drinking endless cups of tea, and occasionally providing scraps of reminiscence about her life growing up in Northern Ireland. But no more than scraps, followed more often than not by an ironic laugh or a shrug of the shoulders. Hers was no history, no life story somehow. It didn't add up to anything. Only as an adult did I realise the significance of divination in the worldview of the ma, and its significance in the world generally. I learned about Chinese writing. I never see that without thinking of the tea leaves. In both cases they're black on a white background. It appears that the Chinese writing system developed from divination. They started as a system of interpretations for the cracks in the oracle bones of sacrificed animals that were then baked in a fire until they cracked. And the way they cracked was itself a kind of primal writing that indicated the will of the gods in matters of human concern. These signs of interpretation were scratched with a knife point on the bone itself. Now, Chinese writing is a graceful thing of brush strokes that don't seem to represent anything. But if you look a bit back to the seal script, you can see it is full of hidden demonic pictures. I admire the beautiful Chinese characters without understanding, but I can imagine that they're an oracle of deep and hidden things, of life and death. I also think then that the Haruspex, the omen reader of antiquity. Principally, he was an inspector of entrails, a priest who examined the internal organs, such as the liver of a sacrificed animal. He purported to interpret the will of the gods, that is, for the future, in the animal's organ. The organ was divided up into sections, and each possible malformation was thought to be by the will of the god who presided over that particular region. It was just like a modern neurologist examining a human brain and deciding which regions might be affected to particular physiological and mental functions. Taking the omens really is the beginning of all knowledge in human history. To return to tea leaf divination, the ma told us that there were people who seriously could read the cups and who had the gift of the second sight. For this was what it really was, the supernatural ability to see future events before they happen. Now, as I realise, we were getting to the real stuff. It's perhaps not a coincidence that the example she quoted of a serious teacup reader should be that of a man, not a woman. Her friend Maureen Robbins had told her the story of a man from the country who read the cups. One time at a social gathering, he was reading cups and was given the cup of a woman who was there. He grew very pale and handed it back, saying, "I'll not read that cup." A few weeks later, the woman was dead. So here was teacup reading in serious mode, with life and death at stake. As the years went by and we got older, The ma read our teacups less and less. What finally put paid to the ma's teacup reading, I'm sure, was the case of Auntie Carmel. This was me father's sister, also the youngest in a family of boys. She had stayed at home to keep house for her elderly father, a widower, and then she had inherited the house. She used to entertain numerous relatives in the large kitchen there, serving tea with Christmas cake, plum pudding, mince pies, and other seasonal treats of winter and summer. We were there one evening, and the ma must have responded to encouragement from someone to read the cups of the company. She was now standing in the midst of the group on the stone floor of the kitchen as the cups were passed to her, and I remembered the cup that she dropped suddenly on the floor, so that it shattered in 1,000 fragments. She looked very pale and all alone there, with staring eyes. People were murmuring conciliatory things. An unfortunate accident, as others came with a broom and pan from the kitchen closet to clean up all the bits of broken crockery. The cup had been Carmel's. Some time later, we heard that Carmel was going into hospital to have a knee operation. It was, in the nature of things, a fairly minor matter. She had a visitor in the man the day, and was due to come home, but then suddenly we heard something had gone wrong after the operation. Sepsis had set in. After the next time they saw her, the ma told us she was a very frightened woman. Then she suddenly died. The ma and da went to the hospital right away. But after the ma had viewed the corpse, she told the da not to go and look at his sister, as he shouldn't remember her that way, and he complied with seeming relief. Then back at home, the ma told us kids, we were older now, that Auntie Carmel's face in death had been contorted. She looked devilish, was the way she put it. I wondered at the time that she didn't spare herself or see the need to, although she obviously felt the need to protect our father. She was someone armed with enough strength to cope with Carmel's devilish death mask. Auntie Carmel had been a maiden aunt. She never married. As the ma said, she'll die wondering, and laughed. Well, she did die wondering, but it was more like wondering what had happened to her, and how the ma could know about it in advance. Needless to say, I can't remember the ma reading the teacup, even in fun, after that. Somehow she'd seen Carmel's fate in the cup and had dropped it in mortal fright. The shattering of the cup created a distraction and meant she could pass it off as an accident. But now, as she occasionally remarked, she always saw before her the devilish death mask of Carmel, death mocking life, whenever she thought of her sister-in-law. She couldn't get that mask out of her head. Carmel had had no children. She died wondering, as they said. But there was something terrible in a woman's face, the bringer of life and love in the nature of things, being distorted into a mocking devil's mask, making a mockery of life instead of blessing it. I wonder how the ma felt when she saw Carmel's face in death. Perhaps the devilish look was a look of reproach meant only for her. She seems to have thought that the experience was something she alone had to bear, as a death secret shared between her and her sister-in-law. I dare say someone would be angry at another who had the gift of foreseeing her death when she herself couldn't. Someone like the ma, casually reading cups, had no right to know such a thing. She was no priest or druidess, ceremonially inducted into some order. But I think the ma must have known that the piece of Craig feyness that had come down to her was not so much a gift as a curse. Despite her joking, despite the impression of harmlessness she gave, I think the truth was that the ma was in touch with dark powers she had inherited from her family, the Craigs. They had a banshee, a ghostly mourner of their own for members of the family who died. I remember well the story she told me, though I had no idea the significance of it at the time. How, when her mother died in 1930, an eldest son of the Craig family heard a banshee keening outside the house that night, even though it was in the middle of Dublin. You have been listening to She Died Wondering from Weird Tales Told by a Dubliner by Turlough, Conmee. If you enjoyed the story, don't forget to like, subscribe, share and comment. And so, until next time.